Okay, one quick thing before I start boring you to sleep. And yes, I'm aware that's technically the entire business model here. Sleepless Historian is now on Spotify, so if you're one of those people who starts an episode, puts the phone next to the bed, and wakes up 6 hours later having absolutely no idea what happened to the Roman Empire, Spotify might actually be perfect for you. You can find our episodes there now, and if you'd like to support the channel, give us a follow and a 5-star rating. That would genuinely mean a lot. The link is in the description. Now, enough advertising. Let's talk about people who have been dead for several hundred years.
Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the surprisingly complicated world of medieval parenthood. A time when raising a child meant balancing love, religion, superstition, family honor, and the uncomfortable possibility that your toddler might be considered morally suspicious before they could even properly use a spoon. So before you get comfortable, take a moment like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in the medieval world with absolutely no idea that several adults have already begun planning your entire life. You cannot speak, you cannot walk, you cannot even reliably control your own head. Yet questions about your inheritance, occupation, marriage, education, and spiritual future may already be hovering around your cradle. You have been alive for approximately 5 minutes, and somehow you already have career expectations. Your parents do not simply see a baby, they see a new member of a household. And in medieval society, the household is far more than a collection of people sharing a roof. It is an economic unit, a social network, a source of protection, and one of the foundations of your identity. What you eventually do will reflect upon everyone around you, so raising you properly matters enormously. If you are born into a farming family, your parents know that one day you may help with animals, crops, repairs, gathering fuel, or carrying water. If you are born to an artisan, you might eventually learn the family trade. If you are born into the nobility, things become considerably more complicated. Your marriage could strengthen an alliance, your inheritance could determine who controls valuable land, and your behavior might affect the reputation of an entire lineage. Quite an impressive list of responsibilities for someone currently trying to eat a blanket. But these plans do not mean your parents lack affection for you. Medieval parenting often combines genuine emotional attachment with an extraordinary amount of practicality. Your mother can adore you while thinking about your eventual marriage. Your father can panic when you become sick while simultaneously wondering whether you will someday be capable of managing the family property. To them, there is no contradiction. Preparing you for adulthood is part of loving you. Unfortunately for you, medieval adulthood begins casting its shadow surprisingly early. Your childhood certainly contains play, stories, games, affection, and mischief, but gradually, usefulness enters the picture. You learn how the household functions. You discover whom you must obey. You receive religious instruction. Small responsibilities appear, followed by larger ones. Nobody asks whether you feel ready. Medieval childhood does not have much of a customer service department, and your parents have another reason to think about your future so intensely. Nothing about that future is guaranteed. They may imagine you becoming a farmer, merchant, craftsman, wife, husband, priest, soldier, or heir. They may worry about whom you will marry and whether you will bring honor to the family. But before any of those carefully constructed plans matter, medieval life presents your parents with a much simpler and considerably darker challenge. First, they have to keep you alive. And keeping you alive is going to occupy a surprising amount of your parents' attention. From the moment you are born, you enter a world where childhood is dangerously uncertain. Your parents do not have antibiotics, modern vaccines, intensive care units, or a pediatrician they can call because you have developed a suspicious cough at 3 in the morning. They have experience, traditional remedies, religious faith, local healers, and the advice of relatives who are extremely confident despite having no idea what bacteria are. So when you become sick, your parents worry. A fever that would be manageable today can become genuinely frightening. An infection from a small wound can turn serious. Contaminated food and water bring their own dangers, while outbreaks of disease can move through communities with little warning, and children are especially vulnerable. This changes the psychology of parenting. Your mother may repeatedly check whether you are warm enough. Your family watches your appetite and notices changes in your behavior. If you stop eating, become unusually quiet, develop a fever, or struggle to breathe, the household can quickly shift from ordinary routine into anxiety. Unfortunately, medieval medicine does not always improve the situation. Depending on where and when you live, your parents might turn to herbal preparations, dietary changes, physicians, local healers, religious rituals, or some combination of all of them. Essentially, if one treatment fails, medieval healthcare occasionally adopts the strategy of adding another treatment and hoping God recognizes the enthusiasm. Prayer becomes particularly important because illness is not understood purely as a physical event. Your parents inhabit a Christian world in which divine protection, saints, sin, providence, and the condition of the soul can all shape how suffering is understood. This does not mean they simply pray and do nothing else. They can pray while seeking treatment. They can use remedies while requesting a priest. They can combine practical care with religious hope because, from their perspective, there is no clear boundary between the two. And beneath all of this lies a fear modern parents still recognize immediately: they might lose you. That possibility does not necessarily make them emotionally distant. In many cases, it makes their attachment painfully visible. Medieval evidence contains parents grieving children, commemorating them, praying for them, and remembering them long after their deaths. High mortality does not make grief disappear, it simply makes grief more familiar. So while your parents are already imagining your future occupation, marriage, responsibilities, and place within the family, they are also learning not to take that future for granted. And this creates one of the great contradictions of medieval parenting. You live in a society accustomed to children dying, yet your parents can still be absolutely terrified that the next child might be you. With death so common, you might assume your parents protect themselves by simply becoming less attached to you. It sounds logical. If there is a serious possibility that you will not survive childhood, perhaps your mother avoids becoming too emotionally invested. Perhaps your father sees you mainly as another mouth to feed until you are old enough to become useful. There is just one problem with this theory. Medieval parents stubbornly refuse to behave that neatly. You can find evidence of parents worrying about their children, celebrating them, giving them gifts, arranging care for them, praying for their health, and experiencing devastating grief when they die. Medieval people may be accustomed to death, but being familiar with tragedy does not make tragedy particularly enjoyable. Your mother can become intensely attached to you during your earliest years. She feeds you, carries you, comforts you, watches you sleep, and worries when something seems wrong. Your father may express affection differently, especially within a society where his role can be strongly connected to authority and providing for the household. But that does not make him emotionally absent. He might worry about your education, send instructions concerning your welfare, arrange opportunities for you, or spend money on something you need, and sometimes something you absolutely do not need. Apparently, children discovered the concept of asking their parents for unnecessary things long before advertising perfected it. Affection also appears through physical closeness. Medieval images and writings can show parents holding children, children sitting near adults, and families interacting in ways that feel surprisingly familiar. You are not permanently standing silently in a dark corner waiting to be assigned agricultural labor. You play, you laugh, you annoy people, you demand attention. In other words, you make a respectable attempt at childhood. Of course, medieval affection does not always look like modern affection. Your parents may genuinely love you while believing that obedience is more important than happiness. They may arrange your future without consulting you. They may discipline you harshly and consider that discipline part of responsible parenting. That combination can seem uncomfortable today, but your parents are not trying to prepare you for the 21st century. They are preparing you for their world, a world where family, religion, reputation, work, and hierarchy determine much of your future. And because they care about you, they want you to survive within it. That is what makes medieval parenting psychologically interesting. Love is certainly present, but love does not necessarily mean freedom, softness, or endless reassurance. Sometimes love means holding you close. Sometimes it means praying beside your bed. And sometimes, unfortunately for you, it means deciding that your character requires improvement. Which brings us to a rather uncomfortable medieval question. What exactly do your parents think is wrong with you? So what exactly do your parents think is wrong with you? Well, you have only just arrived, and medieval Christianity already has some concerns. You may look innocent enough, you are tiny, confused, and currently incapable of committing anything more serious than keeping the entire household awake. But to your parents, your physical health is only part of the problem. They also have your soul to worry about. In medieval Christian thought, humanity inherits original sin. This does not mean your parents look into your cradle and conclude that you are personally responsible for the fall of mankind. You have barely discovered your own hands, but it does mean baptism carries enormous spiritual importance. And because children can die young, your parents may want you baptized as quickly as circumstances allow. There is very little interest in waiting until you are old enough to appreciate the ceremony. Your opinion, unsurprisingly, is not requested. This urgency reveals something important about medieval parenting. Your parents do not divide your well-being neatly into physical health, emotional development, and religion. These things overlap. Protecting your soul is part of protecting you. So shortly after birth, you may be carried to church, surrounded by adults, introduced to godparents, blessed, baptized, and formally welcomed into the Christian community. You contribute mainly by crying. It is your first major religious ceremony, and your performance is memorable. Your godparents can become important figures in your life as well. Spiritual kinship creates relationships extending beyond your biological family, giving you another collection of adults who may feel some responsibility for your moral development, because apparently two parents are not enough people to monitor your behavior. As you grow, religion continues to shape how your parents understand their responsibilities toward you. You will eventually learn prayers, attend church, hear religious stories, observe feast days, and become familiar with ideas about heaven, hell, saints, sin, confession, and salvation. From your perspective, this means the universe is introduced to you with remarkably high stakes. Behave properly, obey your parents, respect religious authority, avoid sin, also, finish whatever is in your bowl. The last one may not determine your eternal salvation, but your mother appears equally committed to it. Your parents believe they are responsible not merely for producing an adult who can work and maintain a household, but for helping form a good Christian, which creates a rather intimidating parenting objective. Modern parents might worry about getting you into a good school. Your medieval parents are worried about getting you into heaven. And unfortunately, as you grow old enough to develop a personality, adults begin noticing that you are not always especially cooperative with either plan. And once you become old enough to develop a personality, you create a new problem for your parents. You have opinions. Worse, you have discovered that you can express them. A newborn can cry, sleep, eat, and produce astonishing quantities of laundry. But as you grow, you begin wanting things. You grab objects. You refuse instructions. You become jealous. You hit your sibling because apparently he looked at your piece of bread with criminal intent. To you, this is simply childhood. To medieval moral thinkers, however, some of these behaviors can look like the earliest appearance of human weakness. Medieval Christian teaching does not necessarily portray you as deliberately evil. Adults understand that a small child cannot reason like a grown person, but childhood is not always romanticized as a state of perfect natural innocence either. You possess impulses, and impulses require management. If you are greedy, you must learn restraint. If you lie, you must learn honesty. If you become angry, you must learn self-control. If you refuse to obey, your parents are expected to correct you. Unfortunately, medieval parenting has not yet discovered the technique of kneeling beside you and asking you to explain your feelings about boundaries. There are boundaries. You have crossed them. This concludes the discussion. Religious teaching strengthens this attitude. because your character is understood as something that must be formed. Good behavior does not simply appear naturally with age. Your parents, teachers, clergy, and eventually masters or employers are supposed to help shape it. Think of yourself as a very small moral construction project. The building is behind schedule. Your parents, therefore, pay attention to habits that might seem trivial. Table manners, respectful speech, prayer, honesty, obedience, modesty, and how you behave toward older people can all become evidence of the adult you are becoming. And adults love predicting your entire future from one irritating afternoon. You steal a pastry today, and apparently everyone is worried you will become an outlaw by Thursday. Still, there is logic behind the anxiety. Your reputation will matter enormously as you grow older. Whether you become a servant, artisan, merchant, wife, husband, cleric, or landholder, other people must trust that you understand the rules of your community. Your parents are therefore not simply trying to stop you from misbehaving today. They believe they are preventing future disaster, and because you are clearly not managing this enormous character development project alone, someone needs to supervise you. Fortunately, medieval households contain no shortage of volunteers. Your mother, in particular, is watching much more closely than you might like, and that person is usually your mother. Let us give your parents names. Your mother is Matilda, and your father is William. They are ordinary medieval parents, which means they love you deeply, worry constantly about your survival, and possess absolutely no concept of giving you personal space. During your earliest years, Matilda dominates much of your daily world. She watches what you eat, how you sleep, whether you are warm enough, whether you look ill, whether you are behaving properly, and increasingly, whether you are developing the sort of habits that will prevent William from sighing heavily whenever your name is mentioned. And Matilda is rarely working alone. Your grandmother may be nearby. Older sisters can help. Female relatives and neighbors exchange advice. In wealthier households, servants or a wet nurse might participate in your care. This means your childhood is supervised by what is essentially a medieval intelligence network. You cannot quietly develop a cough. Someone will report it. You cannot refuse breakfast. Matilda will know. You cannot hit your younger brother behind the house and reasonably expect the matter to remain classified. By dinner, 3 women and possibly the parish priest have somehow heard about it. But Matilda's constant attention has practical reasons. She lives in a world where small problems can become serious quickly. If your appetite suddenly disappears, if you develop a fever, or if you seem unusually weak, noticing early might matter. She therefore learns your normal behavior extremely well, which is unfortunate when you begin lying. You insist you did not steal the bread. Matilda looks at you. You repeat your claim. She looks at the missing bread, then she looks at the crumbs on your clothing. Medieval forensic science has achieved another breakthrough. Her responsibility also extends beyond your physical health. She may teach you prayers, manners, household routines, and appropriate behavior. As you become older, she gradually introduces responsibilities suited to your circumstances. You might help carry something, watch a younger sibling, gather small items, assist with food preparation, or learn tasks connected to the household. Naturally, you perform these duties with the enthusiasm children have traditionally reserved for duties. Matilda does not care. To her, learning responsibility is part of becoming useful, disciplined, and respectable. Yet her authority should not be mistaken for emotional coldness. She can comfort you when frightened, care for you when sick, defend you, worry about you, and occasionally indulge you. William may even accuse her of being too soft. Matilda may respond that William understands nothing about children, and suddenly you discover another timeless feature of parenting. Your parents do not always agree on how to raise you, which is particularly interesting because William is about to become much more involved. And then there is William. Your father is easy to imagine as the stereotypical medieval patriarch. Stern expression, permanently disappointed eyebrows, and an extraordinary ability to turn every conversation into a lecture about responsibility. But William is more complicated than that. As head of the household, he carries considerable authority over you. He may make decisions about your education, work, apprenticeship, inheritance, marriage, and eventually where you fit within the wider community. This means William spends a surprising amount of time thinking about your future. Unfortunately, you spend considerably more time thinking about whether you can climb onto the roof. The two of you have different priorities. William's affection may also look different from Matilda's. He might not participate as constantly in your earliest physical care, but that does not mean he is indifferent. Medieval fathers could worry deeply about their children, provide for them, arrange opportunities, offer advice, and grieve when they were lost. William simply expresses love through preparation. If you are a son, he may eventually begin teaching you skills connected with his work. Perhaps you accompany him into fields, workshops, markets, or meetings. You watch how he deals with neighbors and conducts business. Naturally, William believes you are observing his wisdom. You are actually watching a chicken. Still, gradually you learn. If you are a daughter, William's concerns may focus differently. Your reputation, security, marriage prospects, and future household can become important considerations. A suitable marriage may involve negotiations between families, and William may regard arranging it as one of his major parental responsibilities. Romance has not been completely removed, it is merely acquired administration. At home, William is also expected to enforce discipline. Perhaps Matilda tells him that you have been troublesome. William summons you. You immediately discover that Matilda has maintained surprisingly detailed records. Apparently, the prosecution has witnesses. But William's authority does not mean you live in permanent terror of him. Fathers could joke with children, show tenderness, give gifts, worry about illness, and become emotionally attached. And you gradually learn something useful. Your parents have different weaknesses. Matilda might refuse something William allows. William might say no until Matilda persuades him otherwise. This is important information. You begin experimenting. You ask Matilda, no. You ask William, no. You wait several hours and ask Matilda again, using slightly different wording. Congratulations, you have independently invented medieval lobbying. Unfortunately, your parents eventually notice. And when Matilda and William agree on something, their favorite subject is increasingly the same. You need to learn obedience. And unfortunately for you, Matilda and William agree on this one completely. You need to learn obedience. To your medieval parents, obedience is not simply about making their lives easier, although after watching you ignore the same instruction 4 times, Matilda certainly appreciates that benefit. Obedience is part of becoming a respectable person. You are growing up in a society built around hierarchy. Children obey parents, servants obey masters, apprentices obey craftsmen, subjects owe obedience to rulers, and Christians are taught obedience to God. So your household becomes your first introduction to this enormous system. William gives you an instruction. You are expected to follow it. There is no family meeting. There is no negotiation period. You cannot request clarification from management. William is management. Matilda reinforces the same lesson throughout ordinary life. You are expected to speak respectfully, behave properly at meals, complete whatever small responsibilities you have been given, and listen when an older person corrects you. Naturally, you test this system immediately. Perhaps Matilda tells you not to touch something. You touch it. She tells you again. You stare directly at her while slowly reaching toward it. Congratulations! You have discovered a form of psychological warfare available exclusively to small children. Matilda has seen it before. Your parents worry about this behavior because they believe habits formed during childhood can follow you into adulthood. A disobedient child might become an unreliable servant, troublesome apprentice, irresponsible spouse, or generally unpleasant neighbor. William therefore sees your refusal to carry a basket not as an isolated disagreement about baskets, but potentially as the beginning of your moral collapse. You are 8. The basket is heavy. Nevertheless, civilization apparently depends upon you moving it. Religion adds another layer. Honoring and obeying your parents has spiritual significance, so parental authority can be reinforced by religious teaching. When William tells you that obedience is pleasing to God, you suddenly discover that appealing to a higher authority will not help. William has already contacted higher authority, but obedience is also practical preparation. As you grow, you will interact with people outside your family who possess authority over you. A master might supervise your apprenticeship. A landholder might expect obligations from your household. Clergy instruct you religiously. Employers, patrons, and senior relatives all occupy places within the social hierarchy. Your parents therefore believe that learning when to obey is necessary for surviving the adult world. This does not mean you actually become obedient. You delay, you complain, you pretend not to hear, you perform tasks with astonishing slowness. Medieval children, it turns out, possess the same advanced resistance techniques as modern ones, and when words repeatedly fail, Matilda and William have another educational method available. One you are going to like considerably less. Unfortunately, Matilda and William are not the only people interested in your behavior. You are growing up in a medieval community where raising a child is rarely treated as an entirely private project. Relatives, neighbors, clergy, masters, older siblings, and other respected adults may all feel perfectly comfortable correcting you. In practical terms, you have been born into a surveillance state operated by people who know your mother. Suppose William sends you to deliver something to a neighbor. The journey should take 10 minutes. You return an hour later. You explain that there were unavoidable complications. Unfortunately, Agnes from 2 houses away has already informed Matilda that she saw you throwing stones into a ditch with another boy. Agnes was not asked to participate in your upbringing. Agnes does not care. She has appointed herself regional director of childhood behavior, and your parents may actually appreciate this. Medieval households depend heavily on community relationships. Your family lives among people whose opinions matter. Neighbors can provide help during illness, exchange goods, share work, witness agreements, spread information, and, most importantly from your perspective, notice absolutely everything. Your reputation therefore begins developing long before adulthood. If you behave badly in another household, William may hear about it. If you disrespect an older person, Matilda may hear about it. If you skip an obligation and believe nobody noticed, somebody noticed. There is always an Agnes. Religious authorities add another layer. Priests teach moral behavior and religious duties, reinforcing lessons your parents give at home. As you grow older, other adults may gain even greater authority over you. If you become an apprentice, for example, your master is not simply teaching you a craft. He may supervise your conduct, discipline, work habits, and daily routine. You have successfully escaped William's supervision, only to acquire William too. Older siblings can participate as well. If Matilda tells your older brother to watch you, he suddenly possesses authority he was absolutely not mature enough to receive. He enjoys this immensely, you do not. Yet there is practical logic behind this communal approach. Your parents know they cannot personally prepare you for every situation. You must learn how to behave around people outside your immediate family. Medieval parenting therefore extends beyond the walls of your home. You are being shaped by an entire social environment, which creates one unfortunate mathematical reality. The more adults allowed to correct you, the greater the chance that eventually one of them decides words are no longer enough. And medieval adults have some very definite opinions about what should happen next. And eventually, one of those adults decides that words are no longer getting through to you. This is unfortunate because medieval adults have a rather different understanding of discipline than you do. You think discipline should involve William explaining why your behavior was disappointing. William thinks he already explained it yesterday, and Tuesday, and apparently you have chosen violence against the concept of listening. Physical punishment is accepted in many medieval settings as a legitimate method of correction. Parents, teachers, and masters can believe that controlled punishment prevents worse behavior later. The objective, at least theoretically, is not simply to hurt you because an adult is angry. It is to correct your character. This distinction is considerably more comforting to William than it is to you. You might be struck with a hand, switch, rod, or another conveniently available object. The precise form varies enormously depending on your family, social setting, age, and the adult responsible for you. But punishment does not always have to be physical. You can be scolded, shamed, deprived of something enjoyable, assigned unpleasant work, or forced to apologize, and somehow apologizing can feel worse. Matilda stands beside you. William waits. You stare at the floor. The person you insulted waits. Suddenly you would prefer agricultural labor. Medieval moral and educational writing frequently presents correction as necessary, because adults fear what happens when children are allowed to develop bad habits unchecked. Your parents believe your character is still flexible. If they correct dishonesty now, perhaps you will become trustworthy. If they correct laziness now, perhaps you will become hardworking. If they correct disrespect now, perhaps you will become respectable. If they correct your habit of chasing chickens through the house, well, that one is mainly for Matilda. But your parents also understand that discipline can go too far. Medieval discussions of child rearing were not simply instructions to punish children constantly. Excessive severity could be criticized, while correction was ideally supposed to have a moral purpose. Whether every irritated medieval father remembered this distinction at the end of a very long day is another question. William is human. You have been testing that humanity since breakfast. Still, the psychology behind his discipline matters. William does not necessarily punish you because he dislikes you. Quite the opposite. He may punish you precisely because he believes your future character is partly his responsibility. And this creates one of the strangest ideas you encounter in medieval childhood. Matilda can comfort you when you are frightened. William can worry desperately when you are sick. Both can love you deeply, and both can sincerely believe that occasionally making you miserable is part of good parenting. In their minds, punishment and love are not opposites. Sometimes, rather inconveniently, punishment is supposed to prove the love. And this is where medieval parenting becomes psychologically strange. Matilda and William can love you deeply while sincerely believing that correcting you, sometimes painfully, is one of the ways they prove it. To them, refusing to discipline you might actually seem less loving. Imagine that William catches you lying. Again, he could ignore it. That would certainly make your afternoon more pleasant. You would disappear outside. William would return to whatever he was doing, and everyone could enjoy a peaceful evening. Except William is thinking about the adult you might become. If you learn that lying has no consequences at 8, perhaps you will still be dishonest at 18. Then you might cheat customers, deceive your employer, damage the family's reputation, or become generally known around the village as that man nobody should lend a goat to. William refuses to have that on his legacy, so he corrects you. From his perspective, a little unpleasantness now might prevent considerably greater trouble later. This idea appears repeatedly in medieval thinking about discipline. Children require correction because their habits and character are still being formed. You, naturally, have developed a competing educational philosophy. You believe you have learnt your lesson immediately. In fact, you learnt it just before William entered the room. There is really no need to continue. Matilda remains unconvinced. What makes this stranger is that punishment can be followed by perfectly genuine affection. William might discipline you in the morning and worry about your cough that evening. Matilda might scold you harshly and later make sure you are warm in bed. To modern eyes, those behaviors can feel contradictory. To your parents, they belong to the same responsibility. They are trying to protect both your body and your character. But medieval writers could also recognize a danger at the opposite extreme. Too much severity might create resentment, fear, or other problems. Discipline was ideally supposed to correct rather than become uncontrolled cruelty. Which means William is expected to find the perfect balance between firmness and affection. An easy task, obviously, especially when he has had no sleep. The harvest is poor. Something is leaking through the roof, and you have just announced that the chicken is missing. Again, still, there is another possibility worrying medieval moralists. Perhaps William is not too strict. Perhaps Matilda is not strict enough. Because medieval people complain about something that sounds suspiciously familiar. Parents who spoil their children, and after several chapters of being supervised, corrected, and morally evaluated, you may finally be about to receive some good news. And finally, after all that discipline, medieval writers acknowledge a possibility you may find considerably more appealing. Perhaps your parents are being too strict. Perhaps you deserve more freedom. Perhaps Matilda should give you that extra piece of honey cake. Unfortunately, that is not where the argument goes. Instead, medieval moralists also worry about parents who are too indulgent with their children. A mother or father who constantly excuses bad behavior, gives children whatever they demand, or refuses to correct them, can be accused of preparing them badly for adulthood. So yes, medieval society has invented the spoiled child. And naturally, Matilda suspects you might become one. Suppose you refuse to finish a household task because you want to go outside. You complain. You negotiate. You suddenly develop a mysterious pain in your leg. Matilda looks concerned. You explain that carrying firewood would probably make the condition fatal. Then someone mentions that the other children are playing outside. Miraculously, your recovery is immediate. Medieval medicine records another extraordinary success. Sometimes Matilda gives in anyway. Perhaps she is tired. Perhaps she finds your complaints amusing. Perhaps you are her youngest child and she has become softer with experience. William notices. You indulge that child too much, he says. Matilda reminds him that 3 days ago he secretly gave you something, after specifically telling her that children should not always get what they want. William explains that this was different. It was not different. You quietly leave before the investigation reaches you. The tension reflects a genuine medieval concern. Parents are supposed to love their children, but affection should not prevent correction. Too much indulgence might supposedly encourage laziness, arrogance, greed, or disobedience. Your parents therefore face an impossible balancing act. Be affectionate, but not excessively indulgent. Be strict, but not cruel. Protect you, but prepare you for hardship. Correct you, but do not drive you away. William would probably appreciate a parenting manual. Unfortunately, the available manuals are often written by religious scholars who do not currently have you hiding a frog underneath their dinner table. So Matilda and William improvise. Sometimes they are strict, sometimes they forgive you. Sometimes William announces a punishment and Matilda quietly reduces it. Sometimes Matilda says no, and William ruins everything by laughing, and through this inconsistent mixture of affection, discipline, irritation, and exhaustion, you slowly learn how your family works. But not every lesson requires punishment. Many of the most important things you learn happen almost accidentally. You simply watch the adults around you, and because nobody has invented instructional videos yet, observation is about to become your primary educational technology. And this is where much of your real education begins. Nobody sits you down every morning with a carefully organized curriculum titled Essential Skills for Surviving Medieval Europe. Instead, you watch. You watch Matilda prepare food, mend clothing, organize supplies, negotiate with neighbors, care for younger children, and somehow remember where everything in the household is. William can spend 10 minutes looking for a tool. Matilda knows where it is without turning around. This is perhaps the closest thing your household has to witchcraft. You also follow William whenever circumstances allow. Depending on your family's position, you might watch him farm, repair equipment, sell goods, work at a craft, handle animals, or negotiate with other adults. At first, you are mostly an observer. Then comes the dangerous moment. William decides you can help. He gives you a simple task. You immediately discover that watching someone perform a skill and actually performing it yourself are completely different experiences. William makes splitting wood look effortless. You make it look like an assassination attempt against the ground. Still, you learn. This kind of imitation is enormously important because medieval children acquire many practical skills within the household rather than through formal schooling. You watch older people perform tasks repeatedly, then begin assisting with simpler parts yourself. Matilda might show you how something is prepared. William demonstrates how a tool should be handled. An older sibling teaches you a shortcut. Your grandmother tells you that everyone else is doing it incorrectly. Gradually, repetition turns into competence. You also imitate behavior. You observe how William speaks to people of higher status. You notice how Matilda receives guests. You learn when adults lower their voices, when they show respect, how they behave in church, and which jokes apparently become unacceptable the moment a priest walks nearby. Nobody needs to explain every social rule. You absorb them. Unfortunately, you also absorb the less desirable habits. Perhaps William uses an interesting word after hitting his thumb with a hammer. You repeat it at dinner. Silence. Matilda looks at William. William looks at you. You have learned two lessons simultaneously. The first is a new word. The second is that medieval education occasionally has consequences for the teacher. But imitation does something deeper than simply teach you skills. It slowly introduces you to the adult role your parents expect you to occupy. You are no longer merely being cared for, you are being trained. Each little responsibility pulls you closer toward the working world around you. Thankfully, your childhood is not entirely labor and moral preparation, because whenever Matilda and William stop finding useful things for you to do, you discover something children across every century have been remarkably talented at creating for themselves. Fun. Thankfully, Matilda and William cannot find useful work for you every minute of the day. They try, but eventually you escape. And the moment you have free time, you do what children have done with remarkable consistency throughout history. You play. Medieval childhood is sometimes imagined as an endless sequence of work, prayer, discipline, disease, and adults telling you to behave yourself. All of those things exist, certainly, but so does an enormous amount of ordinary childhood entertainment. You run, you chase other children, you wrestle, you throw stones at things that absolutely did nothing to deserve it. You play with balls, sticks, hoops, improvised toys, and whatever objects can be transformed into entertainment without Matilda discovering that they originally belonged in the kitchen. A piece of wood becomes a horse, another becomes a sword, a pile of dirt becomes a fortress, your younger brother becomes the invading army. He was not consulted. Games also allow you to imitate the adult world. You might pretend to fight battles, conduct trades, hold miniature ceremonies, care for dolls, imitate household work, or reproduce whatever activities you regularly see around you. Essentially, you spend your free time pretending to be an adult. This is ironic because adulthood will eventually arrive, and you will spend much of it wishing someone would allow you to play again. Your parents do not necessarily oppose play either. Medieval adults recognize that children behave differently from adults, and that recreation has a place in childhood. The problem begins when recreation interferes with responsibility. William tells you to bring something inside. You are playing. You say, "In a moment." William has apparently never encountered this mysterious unit of medieval time. He waits. Your moment lasts 20 minutes. Suddenly the theological debate about whether children naturally require discipline becomes considerably easier for him. Play also gives you a social education your parents cannot completely control. Among other children, you learn competition, cooperation, teasing, loyalty, arguments, and the important diplomatic skill of insisting that somebody else started it. Disputes are inevitable. Someone cheats. Someone gets pushed. Someone goes home crying. 10 minutes later, everyone is playing together again because maintaining a blood feud requires more attention than you currently possess. And while Matilda might occasionally complain about the noise, these games are doing something important. You are learning how to move through the world beyond your parents. You test rules. You imitate adults. You negotiate with other children. You discover what happens when you break promises. And without realizing it, even your games are preparing you for adulthood, especially because many of the objects you play with are miniature versions of the tools, roles, and responsibilities waiting for you. Your toys, rather suspiciously, have an educational agenda, and unfortunately, even your toys appear to be working for Matilda and William. You thought you had finally found something without educational value. You were wrong. The things you play with often imitate the adult world around you. Depending on your family, location, and social status, you might encounter dolls, balls, hoops, spinning tops, whistles, miniature household objects, toy animals, or improvised weapons made from wood. Of course, many toys do not need to be purchased at all. A stick is free, and a stick is also apparently every object ever invented. Today it is a sword, tomorrow it is a horse. Later it becomes a spear. Eventually William takes it away because you have discovered its fifth function. hitting your brother. You consider this censorship. William considers it parenting. Some of your games imitate the responsibilities you see adults performing. If you watch Matilda caring for younger children, preparing food, spinning, sewing, or managing household tasks, you may reproduce versions of these activities in play. If you regularly see William working with animals, tools, carts, weapons, or merchandise, those things can enter your games as well. For wealthier children, toys might be more elaborate. A young noble boy could play with objects reflecting horses, warfare, or aristocratic life, while girls might receive dolls or miniature objects associated with household management. But the boundary is hardly perfect. Children have never been famous for respecting the intended use of toys. Give you a carefully made wooden horse, and within 20 minutes it has somehow become a siege engine. Your parents may actually approve of some of this imitation. Play allows you to practice adult roles without being trusted with adult consequences. This is useful because William has seen what happened when he trusted you with an actual tool. The fence still remembers. Your toys also reveal how quickly medieval childhood points toward adulthood. You are allowed to have fun, but the society surrounding you constantly provides models of what you will eventually become. You pretend to farm before you farm. You imitate household work before you are responsible for it. You play at fighting before warfare becomes something frighteningly real. You imitate marriages and families before your parents begin discussing your own future. For now, none of this concerns you. You are simply playing. But Matilda and William are watching you grow stronger, more capable, and increasingly aware of the world around you. And eventually, they begin asking a question you would probably prefer them to postpone indefinitely. What exactly are they going to do with you? Because your future is approaching, and your parents already have ideas. And now Matilda and William begin looking at you differently. You are no longer the baby whose greatest accomplishment was surviving winter without becoming dangerously ill. You are growing stronger, learning useful skills, and demonstrating enough intelligence to be assigned actual responsibilities. This is terrible news, because usefulness attracts work, and once your parents realize you are becoming useful, they begin thinking seriously about your future. What you will become depends heavily on the family into which you were born. If William farms land, you may gradually learn agricultural work. If he is a craftsman, you might be trained in his trade or eventually apprenticed elsewhere. If your family sells goods, you could learn how to deal with customers, calculate exchanges, recognize quality, and develop the essential merchant skill of looking personally offended by someone else's perfectly reasonable price. Your parents also study your abilities. Perhaps you are physically strong. William approves. Perhaps you are clever with numbers. William approves even more. Perhaps you are excellent at avoiding work while appearing extremely busy. William does not approve, although you have accidentally demonstrated strong potential for management. For daughters, Matilda may pay increasing attention to skills useful in managing a household. Depending on your circumstances, you might learn food preparation, textile work, childcare, household organization, or participation in the family's economic activities. Your future is not necessarily confined entirely to the home. Medieval women could work in agriculture, crafts, shops, markets, and family businesses. But your parents' expectations are shaped strongly by status, wealth, local customs, and gender. And then there is religion. If circumstances allow, a child might be directed toward an ecclesiastical life. For some families, placing a son or daughter within a religious institution can provide education, status, security, or spiritual prestige. You might therefore discover that while you were busy chasing chickens, William was considering your suitability for the church. You cannot read yet. Apparently, this is not preventing strategic planning. The important thing is that your future is rarely imagined as something you will invent entirely for yourself. Your identity belongs partly to your family. Your work affects them. Your marriage affects them. Your reputation affects them. Your success might strengthen the household, while your failures can become everybody's problem. No pressure, and just when you begin understanding that Matilda and William have plans for you, you discover something even more inconvenient. They do not necessarily have the same plans for all their children, because whether you arrived first, second, third, or last can dramatically change what your parents expect from you. In medieval families, birth order can be more than sibling trivia. It can shape your entire future, and unfortunately, you cannot negotiate your birth order. If you are the eldest child, Matilda and William may look at you with a special mixture of pride and expectation. You look back while eating with your hands. This is their future. In families with property, businesses, titles, or hereditary responsibilities, being the eldest son can place particularly heavy expectations on you. Depending on local inheritance customs, you may receive advantages over younger siblings, or be prepared to take a leading role in the household. William therefore watches you carefully. He wants you to understand work, money, property, reputation, and responsibility. You would currently like to understand why your younger brother received the larger piece of bread. Apparently both of you are dealing with important economic questions, but being younger does not mean your parents simply forget you exist. It means they may need different plans. Perhaps there is not enough land to divide comfortably among several sons. Perhaps the family trade can support only so many people. Perhaps one child has opportunities for education or religious life. Suddenly, Matilda and William are not merely raising children. They are solving a medieval spreadsheet without having invented spreadsheets. Every child needs food, clothing, training, and eventually some reasonable path into adulthood. Daughters may require marriage arrangements or other provisions. Sons may need land, work, apprenticeships, connections or positions within religious institutions. And then there is the youngest child. By the time Matilda reaches you, she may have considerably more parenting experience. This can work in your favor. Your eldest brother was raised according to principles. You are being raised according to exhaustion. William once carefully monitored every minor mistake. Now he sees you climbing something dangerous, briefly calculates the likely consequences, and decides you will probably learn faster this way. Your older siblings consider this outrageous. They remember being punished for offenses you now commit almost recreationally. "You never let me do that," your brother complains. Matilda gives the traditional parental response. Things were different. Things were not different. Matilda is tired. Still, birth order can influence serious expectations about inheritance, marriage, work, and family responsibility. Your parents must somehow position several children for adulthood, using whatever resources they possess, and sometimes the best opportunity they can give you is not inside your own home. One evening, William begins discussing another household. Perhaps a craftsman needs an apprentice. Perhaps a wealthier family needs service. Perhaps education is available somewhere else. You listen carefully. Then you realize something deeply alarming. They are talking about you. After years of supervising your every movement, your parents may now decide that the best thing for your future is to send you away. And now you discover that Matilda and William's grand plan for your future may involve removing you from the house entirely. At first, this sounds suspiciously like punishment. You have misbehaved plenty of times, certainly, but exile seems excessive. Yet sending children or adolescents into other households can be a perfectly normal part of medieval growing up. Depending on your circumstances, you might leave home to become an apprentice, enter domestic service, receive education, join a religious community, or live in another household where you can acquire useful skills and connections. William considers this an opportunity. You consider it evidence that the chicken incident has finally gone too far. Suppose William arranges for you to become an apprentice to a craftsman in a nearby town. Suddenly, the familiar world of Matilda's cooking, William's lectures, your siblings' arguments, and Agnes monitoring the street is disappearing. You may actually miss Agnes, not immediately, but eventually. Your new master now occupies a position of authority over you. He does not simply teach you how to work with leather, metal, cloth, wood, or whatever trade you are learning. He may also supervise your behavior, meals, working hours, religious obligations, and general conduct. You have escaped William. Unfortunately, William has outsourced himself. If instead you enter another household as a servant, you encounter a similar transformation. You perform tasks, learn routines, and become accustomed to living under people who are not your parents. For wealthier families, being sent away can look different. Noble children might spend time in other elite households, where they can receive training, learn manners, establish relationships, and absorb the culture expected of their social rank. Whatever the arrangement, separation can be emotionally difficult. Matilda has spent years worrying about whether you are eating enough, sleeping properly, behaving yourself, and avoiding inventive methods of accidental death. Now she must trust someone else to supervise you. This may be harder for her than she admits. William, meanwhile, reminds everyone that this is necessary for your future. He repeats this several times, possibly because he is also trying to convince himself. And you are frightened too. Yet leaving home represents something important. Your parents are beginning to loosen their direct control over you, not because they have stopped caring, but because medieval adulthood requires relationships and skills that your household cannot always provide. Strangely enough, sending you away may therefore be one of the largest investments Matilda and William ever make in your future, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps getting rid of you is actually an act of love. And strangely enough, sending you away may be one of the clearest signs that Matilda and William are thinking seriously about your future. You might not interpret it that way. From your perspective, you have spent your entire childhood being told not to wander too far from home, not to speak to suspicious strangers, and not to disappear without telling anyone. Then one morning, William announces that you are going to live with strangers. Apparently the rules have been updated, but your parents may see enormous value in placing you somewhere else. Another household can teach you skills they cannot provide. A master craftsman can give you training. A wealthier family can offer connections. A religious institution might provide education. In other words, Matilda and William are not necessarily pushing you away. They are attempting to extend your opportunities beyond the limits of their own household. That does not make the separation emotionally easy. Matilda has spent years knowing approximately where you are at every moment, usually because Agnes told her. Now you might be miles away. She cannot check whether you are eating properly. She cannot see whether you are sick. She cannot intervene when somebody treats you unfairly. For a woman who once noticed that you had stolen bread purely because your face looked suspicious, this is a significant loss of intelligence capability. William may handle the separation differently. He reminds you to work hard, respect your master, behave properly. Do not embarrass the family. He gives you so many instructions that you briefly wonder whether the journey itself will last long enough to hear them all. But beneath those lectures can be genuine anxiety. Your behavior in another household reflects on your upbringing. If you become known as reliable and hardworking, William can feel that he prepared you well. If you become known as lazy, dishonest, or troublesome, people may wonder what sort of parents raised you. William would strongly prefer that nobody ask this question, and separation does not necessarily end parental involvement. Depending on circumstances, families can remain concerned with children's welfare and future arrangements even when they are living elsewhere. You are still their child. You are simply becoming someone else's daily problem. For you, the experience can be frightening, exciting, lonely, or liberating, sometimes all before breakfast. But it marks an important psychological change. Matilda and William are slowly accepting that successful parenting eventually requires surrendering some control. They cannot supervise you forever. They can only prepare you and hope their lessons survive without them. And one of the most important tools for preparing you, when circumstances permit, is education. Unfortunately, medieval education depends heavily on one inconvenient detail: who exactly you were born to. And unfortunately, medieval education begins with a question you have absolutely no control over. Who are your parents? If Matilda and William are wealthy, connected, or determined enough, you may have access to formal learning. If they are ordinary laborers struggling to maintain a household, your education is far more likely to happen through work, observation, church, and practical experience. There is no universal school system waiting politely for you. There is barely a universal anything. If you are fortunate, you might receive instruction connected to a monastery, cathedral, parish, or another teacher. You could begin learning Latin, reading, writing, religious texts, and perhaps arithmetic. William is delighted. You are less enthusiastic. For years you have complained that carrying firewood is difficult. Now someone has introduced grammar. You immediately reconsider your position on firewood. Education also depends upon what your parents think you actually need. If William expects you to become a craftsman, practical training may matter far more than reading complicated texts. You need to understand materials, tools, measurements, customers, prices, and the thousand small techniques that separate a competent worker from someone who accidentally destroys an expensive piece of wood. If you are destined for religious life, literacy becomes much more important. Suddenly, Matilda's suspicious discussions about your future make sense. You thought she was impressed because you memorized prayers quickly. She was evaluating career potential. For girls, educational opportunities vary enormously according to status and circumstance. Some girls, particularly from elite families or religious environments, can receive substantial instruction. Others learn primarily the skills necessary for household management, family work, trade, textiles, agriculture, or whatever economic activities surround them. And make no mistake, this is still education. Matilda has been teaching you for years without calling it that. You learn how much food a household requires, how supplies are stored, how work is organized, how younger children are managed, and how social relationships are maintained. You also learn one of Matilda's most advanced skills, knowing everything that happened while apparently being nowhere nearby. No school has successfully formalized the subject. Your parents ultimately want your education to make you capable. Knowledge is useful because adulthood will demand something from you. But as you spend more time learning outside the household, Matilda and William encounter a new problem. They can choose your teacher, they can choose your master, they can give you advice. What they cannot completely choose is whom you spend your free time with, and naturally, you begin making friends. Matilda immediately becomes suspicious. And naturally, the moment you begin choosing your own friends, Matilda becomes suspicious. Until now, your parents have controlled most of the adults around you. They know your relatives, your neighbors, your priest, perhaps your master or teacher. Then you meet another child named Edmund. Decide that Edmund is fascinating, and suddenly Matilda is conducting an investigation. She does not like Edmund. You ask why. She says she has heard things. You ask what things. She says, things. The medieval intelligence network has spoken. Your parents have good reason to care about your companions. Medieval moral teaching places considerable emphasis on character, reputation, and avoiding corrupting influences. If you spend your time with people known for dishonesty, laziness, violence, gambling, drinking, or general troublemaking, adults can fear that you will imitate them. You insist Edmund is not troublesome. At that exact moment, Edmund is probably attempting to steal apples. His timing is unfortunate. William's concern becomes stronger as you grow older, because your friends now offer something your parents increasingly cannot control, an alternative source of influence. William tells you not to do something. Edmund says it will be fine. This creates the first major peer-reviewed study of bad decisions. 3 other boys agree with Edmund. The research is apparently conclusive. Your parents understand how quickly reputation travels through a medieval community. If you are repeatedly seen causing trouble with the same group, people may begin judging you by the company you keep. And because your reputation affects your family, William considers your friendships partly his business. You disagree. This is adorable. Matilda may prefer certain companions because she knows their families. A respectable household feels safer. If she trusts another child's parents, she can assume someone is supervising you. Of course, the other parents are making exactly the same calculation about Matilda. Somewhere nearby, Edmund's mother is probably warning him about you. Neither family realizes the true problem is both of you together. As childhood moves toward adolescence, these concerns become more serious. Your friends can influence where you go, how you speak, what risks you take, and eventually your behavior around drinking, fighting, courtship, and sexuality. Matilda sees danger approaching. William sees irresponsibility approaching. You see freedom approaching. Everyone is technically correct, because you are no longer the little child who follows Matilda around the household. You are becoming older, stronger, increasingly independent, and disturbingly confident that you understand the world. In other words, Matilda and William are about to encounter one of history's most durable psychological challenges. You have become a medieval teenager, and just when Matilda and William think they have finally figured out how to raise you, adolescence arrives and makes most of their previous experience temporarily useless. You are taller now, stronger, more independent, and, most dangerously, increasingly convinced that your judgment is excellent. It is not, but confidence has arrived considerably earlier than wisdom. William notices the change first when instructions that once received reluctant obedience suddenly receive questions. Why? William pauses. This is new. Until recently, you complained while obeying. Now you apparently require supporting documentation. Matilda has problems of her own. You want more freedom to visit friends, attend gatherings, wander farther from home, and spend considerably less time explaining where you have been. She asks when you will return. You say, later, an impressively useless measurement of time. Medieval adults could regard youth as a period associated with impulsiveness, strong passions, pride, recklessness, and insufficient self-control. Your developing independence, therefore, does not necessarily reassure your parents. It terrifies them, and your friends are not helping. Edmund has somehow survived childhood and remains available whenever a terrible idea requires a second participant. You and Edmund decide to stay out longer than permitted. Nothing happens. This is the worst possible outcome. Because now you conclude that Matilda was worrying unnecessarily. The next bad idea becomes slightly larger. William recognizes this pattern because, although he would rather not discuss it, William was once young too. Matilda knows this. Occasionally she mentions it. William suddenly becomes interested in changing the subject. Your parents also begin worrying more seriously about your reputation. Childhood mischief can sometimes be forgiven as childish foolishness. As you approach adulthood, people begin remembering things. Fighting, drinking, gambling, sexual behavior, dishonesty, and public disrespect can damage how others view you. That matters when you need employment, an apprenticeship, business relationships, or eventually a respectable marriage. You think William is exaggerating. William thinks you are proving his point. And beneath all the arguments is something more complicated. Your parents are losing control. For years, Matilda knew where you were. William could simply tell you what to do. Now they increasingly have to trust that you will behave properly when they are absent. That is terrifying because they have personally witnessed your decision-making process. They remember the roof. They remember the missing chicken. They remember Edmund, and adolescence introduces another subject that makes all those earlier problems seem wonderfully simple. You are beginning to notice romance. Matilda notices you noticing. William notices Matilda noticing. And suddenly both of your parents become extremely interested in protecting the family reputation. And suddenly Matilda and William have discovered a problem considerably more frightening than Edmund. Romance. You are old enough to notice other young people. And unfortunately, other young people are beginning to notice you. Matilda detects this development approximately 6 months before you believe anyone has noticed. You mention Alice slightly too often. Matilda says nothing. You ask whether Alice's family will attend an upcoming gathering. Matilda looks at you. You immediately realize the investigation has been active for some time. In medieval society, relationships between young people can carry consequences far beyond private embarrassment. Sex, marriage, legitimacy, inheritance, and family reputation are closely connected. So your romantic decisions can quickly become your parents' concern. If you are a daughter, Matilda and William may be particularly protective of your sexual reputation. Your perceived chastity can affect marriage prospects and your family's standing. If you are a son, you are hardly free from scrutiny. An affair that produces pregnancy, conflict, or accusations can create obligations and disputes your father would strongly prefer not to spend his evenings resolving. William already has enough problems. The roof still leaks. Your romantic life is not improving it. Your parents therefore become interested in where you are going, whom you are meeting, and why returning home apparently takes twice as long whenever Alice happens to be nearby. You insist this is coincidence. Matilda remembers being young. This is extremely inconvenient. William may attempt a serious conversation with you about proper behavior. Neither of you wants this conversation. William begins vaguely. You stare at the floor. He becomes even vaguer. Somehow both of you understand perfectly. It is perhaps the most efficient communication you have ever achieved. But behind the awkwardness lies a serious concern. Your behavior does not belong entirely to you in the medieval social imagination. A scandal can involve households, damage reputations, complicate marriages, and create disputes over responsibility. Your parents therefore see supervision as protection. You see supervision as Matilda somehow appearing every time you attempt to speak privately with Alice. You begin suspecting she can teleport, and your increasing independence makes control harder. Matilda cannot follow you everywhere. William cannot prevent every meeting. Eventually, they must rely on the religious instruction, discipline, and sense of responsibility they have spent years attempting to install in you. A system whose reliability remains uncertain, but their anxiety changes depending on whether you are their son or daughter. Because medieval parents may love their children equally while preparing them for very different worlds. And if you happen to be Matilda and William's daughter, the rules are about to become considerably tighter. And if you happen to be Matilda and William's daughter, you quickly discover that adolescence comes with a rather impressive collection of additional rules. Let us call you Eleanor. Eleanor is old enough to understand exactly what is happening. Her brother can wander around with Edmund for half the afternoon and return covered in mud. William asks what happened. Nothing. Apparently this is sufficient testimony. You return 10 minutes later than expected. Matilda wants names, locations, witnesses, motives, and an approximate reconstruction of events. You are beginning to suspect your gender has affected the investigation, and it has. For medieval parents, a daughter's reputation can have serious consequences for her future. Chastity, respectable behavior, household competence, religious devotion, and obedience may all influence how others judge you, and, importantly, your suitability for marriage. So Matilda watches carefully. She teaches you household skills, proper manners, and how you are expected to behave around other people. Depending on your family's circumstances, you may learn textile work, cooking, childcare, agriculture, trade, or the complicated daily management required to keep a household functioning. William calls these useful skills. You notice your brother is not currently being taught half of them. Your brother explains that he has other responsibilities. At this precise moment, his responsibility appears to involve throwing something at Edmund. Still, your parents' concern is not simply about controlling you. They know that medieval society can judge women harshly for behavior that might be treated differently in men. A damaged reputation can affect marriage negotiations and relationships between families. So when you begin showing interest in a young man named Thomas, Matilda immediately becomes interested in Thomas too. Very interested. Who are his parents? What does his father do? Does he work? Is he respectable? Does he attend church? Why does he keep appearing near the house? You have developed a crush. Matilda has opened a background investigation. William's approach is simpler. He looks at Thomas. Thomas suddenly remembers somewhere else he needs to be. Remarkably effective. But beneath all this supervision is anxiety about your future. Matilda knows that marriage could shape your economic security, household position, and much of your adult life. She therefore wants you prepared. You interpret this as interference. She interprets it as parenting. And somewhere between those two interpretations lies the strange psychology of raising a medieval daughter. But before you decide your brother has escaped the worst of it, you should probably look at him more closely, because William has plans for his son too. And medieval boyhood comes with its own rather unpleasant collection of expectations. And if you are Matilda and William's son, you may have spent the previous chapter feeling rather pleased with yourself. Eleanor has restrictions. You have freedom. Excellent arrangement. Unfortunately, William would like a word. Your greater freedom comes attached to expectations, and William has been quietly increasing them as you grow older. You are expected to become useful, dependable, capable of work, and eventually able to support yourself and perhaps a household of your own. So while Eleanor is receiving another lecture from Matilda about Thomas, William hands you a tool. You look at it. He looks at you. Your childhood appears to have ended sometime during breakfast. Depending on your family's circumstances, you might be expected to learn farming, a craft, trade, animal management, or another occupation. If your family owns property, William may begin teaching you how it is managed. If you belong to the nobility, the expectations change dramatically, but they do not disappear. You might be trained in riding, weapons, estate management, courtly behavior, or the responsibilities associated with your family's position. Essentially, medieval society offers boys more freedom and then immediately sends an invoice. William also expects emotional discipline. Complaining too much about difficult work does not impress him. You announce that you are exhausted. William explains that when he was your age, he worked from sunrise. This is suspicious because, according to Matilda, William spent a significant portion of his youth causing trouble with his cousins. William does not appreciate this contribution to the historical record. Your behavior also reflects on your family. Fighting, drunkenness, gambling, laziness, or dishonesty can damage your reputation just as surely as scandal can damage Eleanor's. And if you are expected to inherit property or continue William's occupation, the pressure becomes greater. One day, people may depend on you. William finds this deeply concerning because yesterday you misplaced a hammer while holding it. He therefore pushes responsibility upon you. More work, more independence, more expectations. You wanted adulthood because you thought it meant nobody could tell you what to do. Instead, everyone simply begins expecting you to know what to do without being told. A devastating misunderstanding. And then another expectation appears. Eventually, William expects you to establish an adult life of your own. For many young men and women, that means marriage. You might imagine that after years of parental supervision, at least choosing whom you marry will finally belong entirely to you. Matilda and William find this idea charming, because in medieval society, marriage is rarely just about two people. Your parents are about to become involved, and now Matilda and William turn their attention toward one of the largest decisions of your adult life, marriage. You might assume that after years of obedience, chores, religious instruction, discipline, apprenticeships, and William explaining responsibility to you, you have finally earned the right to choose something yourself. You have, technically. Unfortunately, your parents also have opinions. Many opinions. Marriage in medieval Europe can involve far more than romantic attraction. Property, money, inheritance, reputation, family connections, occupation, and social standing can all matter when families consider a match. So when you announce that you are interested in Alice, William does not immediately ask whether she makes you happy. He wants to know about her family. Matilda wants to know about her character. William wants to know what property or prospects might be involved. Matilda wants to know whether Alice can manage a household. You would like to mention that Alice has beautiful eyes. Nobody writes this down. Your parents are approaching marriage from a practical perspective because they know how much it can shape your future. A poor match can create financial difficulties, family conflict, or an unhappy household. A useful match might strengthen relationships between families and provide economic stability. Romance is welcome. It simply needs to complete several administrative requirements first. And if you are Eleanor rather than her brother, Thomas receives similar attention. William suddenly becomes extraordinarily interested in Thomas's employment prospects. What does he do? You explain. Is he good at it? You are unsure. William looks concerned. Thomas has been downgraded. Matilda conducts a different investigation. She asks about his temperament, his family, and whether he seems responsible. By the end of the evening, Thomas has undergone a medieval credit check without knowing it. Still, your wishes are not necessarily irrelevant. Medieval marriage practices vary enormously across centuries, regions, and social classes, and church teaching places importance on the consent of the people actually marrying. This can create tension when family preference and personal desire do not align. You want Alice. William prefers another possibility. You argue. Matilda attempts diplomacy. For perhaps the first time, your parents discover that simply ordering you to obey may no longer solve everything. You are approaching adulthood, and marriage will help establish a household separate from theirs. That means Matilda and William are confronting the final stage of a process that began beside your cradle. They have spent years trying to shape your future. Now you are beginning to shape it yourself, and sometimes you choose exactly what they hoped. Sometimes you compromise, and sometimes you look directly at everything your parents carefully planned for you and say no. And sometimes you look directly at everything Matilda and William have carefully planned for you and say no. This is not the response William was expecting. For most of your childhood, resistance had fairly limited possibilities. If William told you to carry firewood, eventually you carried the firewood. Perhaps slowly, perhaps while sighing dramatically enough to suggest you had been sentenced to the mines. But you still did it. Marriage, work, religion, and adulthood are different. You are older now. You have relationships beyond the household. You may earn money, possess useful skills, or have people willing to support your decisions. For the first time, refusing your parents can actually work. This is deeply troubling information for William. Perhaps he prefers one marriage and you want another. Perhaps your parents expect you to continue the family occupation, but you want a different path. Perhaps they dislike your companions or disapprove of where you intend to live. Matilda attempts persuasion. William attempts authority. You attempt the revolutionary medieval strategy of simply leaving the room. Nobody considers this productive. Young medieval people could resist family expectations in various ways. Courtship and marriage were particularly fertile territory for conflict, because personal preference might collide with economic or social considerations, and church emphasis on marital consent could complicate parental control further. Imagine William spending years carefully considering your future marriage. He evaluates families, he thinks about property, he considers reputation. Then you appear one afternoon and announce that you have chosen someone yourself. William experiences several emotions. None improve his afternoon. Matilda asks the obvious question. Who? You answer. Silence. It is Alice. Of course it is Alice. Matilda knew this 6 chapters ago. Resistance can be far more serious than an argument. Young people might pursue relationships their families opposed, leave households, reject arrangements, or otherwise force parents to negotiate with an increasingly independent child. And psychologically, this is difficult for Matilda and William. They have spent years believing that good parenting means directing you. Now successful parenting requires something completely different, letting you decide. They may not enjoy this transition. William particularly does not enjoy it. He has approximately 15 years of experience telling you what to do, and very little experience watching you ignore him as a legal adult. So when control begins slipping away, your parents fall back on something that has guided their parenting since the day you were born: religion. After all, Matilda and William may no longer be able to follow you everywhere, but God, rather conveniently, can. Unfortunately for Matilda and William, God does not have the same supervision problems they do. You can leave the house. You can move to another town. You can become an apprentice, establish your own household, or marry Alice despite William spending several months developing alternative proposals. But according to your parents, you cannot escape divine observation. William finds this reassuring. For years, religion has given your parents a framework for understanding your behavior. When you are obedient, charitable, honest, and respectful, these qualities can be understood as virtues worth encouraging. When you lie, steal, fight, become greedy, or treat Edmund's latest terrible idea as a personal challenge, your behavior can be described through concepts such as temptation and sin. This gives Matilda an impressive advantage during arguments. You insist nobody saw you take something. Matilda reminds you that God saw you. You had not accounted for this witness. The prosecution has become considerably stronger. Religion also helps your parents make sense of events they cannot control. If you become seriously ill, they pray. If you recover, they may give thanks. If the family experiences hardship, Religious explanations can provide meaning in circumstances where practical explanations are limited. Saints, divine providence, confession, prayer, and religious rituals all belong to the mental world in which your parents raise you. This means your moral education extends far beyond because William said so. You are taught prayers, you attend religious services, you learn stories containing examples of virtue, sacrifice, obedience, punishment, and redemption. Matilda can use these stories educationally. There is always somebody in a religious story behaving better than you. This is irritating. Even worse, some of them are children. William particularly enjoys those examples. But religion can provide comfort as well as discipline. Your parents can teach you to pray when frightened, seek spiritual reassurance during illness, and understand yourself as belonging to a Christian community larger than your household. It gives them language for hope when ordinary parenting reaches its limits. And medieval parenting reaches those limits frequently. Matilda cannot prevent every disease. William cannot guarantee a successful harvest. Neither can ensure your marriage will be happy or your adult life prosperous. Religion offers them something valuable when control disappears: trust. Of course, official Christian belief is not the only thing influencing how your family understands danger. Around it exists another layer of inherited customs, protective practices, charms, remedies, warnings, and beliefs passed between generations. Matilda knows several. Her mother knew more. William claims not to believe half of them. Curiously, he still follows some. Because when your child's safety is involved, medieval parents are not always interested in choosing between religion, tradition, and superstition. Sometimes they would simply like all available protection, and this is where Matilda's parenting becomes considerably more creative. Officially, your family lives within a Christian world of priests, prayers, saints, blessings, and church rituals. Unofficially, Matilda also knows approximately 17 things that should never be done near a baby. She learned them from her mother. Her mother learned them from someone else. Nobody remembers why. This does not seem to reduce their authority. Medieval families could live among overlapping religious traditions, folk beliefs, protective customs, charms, remedies, and local ideas about supernatural danger. Exactly what people believed varied enormously between regions and centuries, but parents facing an unpredictable world could be receptive to anything believed to offer protection. And Matilda is especially receptive when the person requiring protection is you. A protective object might be kept nearby. A blessing could be sought. Certain words, prayers, gestures, herbs, or inherited practices might be considered useful against illness or misfortune. William occasionally raises an eyebrow. Matilda ignores him. William points out that the priest might not approve of everything her grandmother recommended. Matilda reminds William that her grandmother raised 8 children. William decides theology can wait until after dinner. The distinction between religion, medicine, and what we would now call superstition is not always neat from your family's perspective. If you become sick, Matilda might use a practical household remedy while also praying for you. Your family might seek religious assistance while following traditional advice passed through generations. Essentially, medieval parenting sometimes follows the principle that if 5 different things might protect the child, there is no obvious reason to choose only one. You receive the remedy. You receive the prayer. You receive the blessing. You receive whatever grandmother recommended. At this point, even the illness may become confused. Some fears concern dangers that modern parents would not recognize in the same way. Unexplained sickness, strange behavior, persistent crying, nightmares, or sudden misfortune might sometimes be interpreted through supernatural ideas. And when nobody understands why something is happening, explanations multiply quickly. You wake screaming during the night. William thinks you had a bad dream. Matilda wonders whether something disturbed you. Grandmother has already developed a supernatural theory. You simply dreamed about a goose. Nobody asks you. Yet underneath these strange practices lies something extremely familiar. Your parents are frightened because they cannot control everything that might happen to you. They use whatever knowledge their world provides to make that uncertainty feel slightly more manageable. And eventually, their fears become horribly practical. because one evening you stop playing. You do not want your food. Matilda touches your forehead. You are burning with fever. Suddenly, nobody is joking about charms or grandmother's advice. You are seriously ill, and the entire household changes. And suddenly, the entire household changes. Yesterday, Matilda was complaining that you would not sit still. Today, she would give almost anything to see you running around the house again. You lie beneath a blanket, sweating with fever, barely interested in food. Matilda touches your forehead for perhaps the 20th time. It is still hot. She checks again anyway. Apparently she suspects your temperature may have reconsidered its position during the previous 30 seconds. William tries to remain calm. He asks whether you have eaten. No. Whether you have drunk anything. A little. Whether you feel better. You mumble something incomprehensible. William nods thoughtfully, as though you have provided useful medical information. The truth is that your parents have frighteningly few reliable ways to understand what is happening inside your body. Depending on their circumstances, they might seek advice from experienced relatives, local healers, physicians, clergy, or people known for particular remedies. Herbal preparations, changes in diet, rest, prayer, and other treatments might all be attempted. Grandmother arrives, naturally. She takes one look at you and immediately knows what should be done. Matilda listens carefully. William asks whether this treatment actually works. Grandmother looks at William. William stops asking questions. Your illness also reveals how closely medieval medicine and religion can exist beside one another. Matilda may administer a remedy and then pray beside you. William might seek practical help while also requesting prayers or appealing to a saint. Nobody sees this as contradictory. When your child is burning with fever, philosophical consistency becomes surprisingly unimportant. You use everything available, and then you wait. That is perhaps the hardest part. Matilda cannot force your body to recover. William cannot repair the problem as though you were a broken fence. For parents accustomed to directing, correcting, teaching, and protecting you, illness creates a terrifying kind of helplessness. So Matilda stays nearby. William repeatedly enters the room, pretending he came for some unrelated reason. He did not. Even Edmund asks about you. This is how everyone knows the situation is serious. Eventually, perhaps the fever begins to break. You ask for something to eat. Matilda nearly cries with relief. William immediately announces that he knew you would recover. He absolutely did not know. But sometimes the ending is different. Sometimes the remedies fail. Sometimes the prayers are followed by silence. And when that happens, medieval parents do not simply shrug because childhood death is common. Matilda and William have spent years fearing that possibility. Now we have to confront what happens when their worst fear becomes real. And sometimes the ending is different. The fever does not break. The remedies do nothing. The prayers continue. Matilda remains beside you while William moves around the house searching for tasks that do not actually need doing. Eventually, there is nothing left for either of them to do. You die. For a long time, historians sometimes portrayed medieval parents as emotionally distant from young children because childhood mortality was so high. The argument sounds practical. If parents regularly lost children, perhaps they learned not to become deeply attached. But human emotions are rarely that efficient. Matilda does not look at your empty bed and calmly calculate medieval mortality statistics. She sees your bed. That is the problem. The ordinary objects you leave behind suddenly become painful. A piece of clothing, a toy, the place where you normally sat, the bowl you used. Yesterday, Matilda was irritated because you left things everywhere. Now she would quite like you to leave something somewhere. William grieves too, although perhaps differently. He may try to remain composed because he believes that is expected of him. He handles practical arrangements. He speaks with clergy. He continues working. Then he notices the wooden object he taught you to use, and suddenly work becomes considerably harder. Medieval evidence shows that parents could mourn children deeply. They might commemorate them, request prayers for their souls, arrange burial. make religious donations, or preserve their memory within the family. Familiarity with death does not eliminate grief. If anything, repeated loss means medieval families may become painfully familiar with mourning itself. Religion offers Matilda and William a framework for understanding what has happened. Prayer, burial rites, beliefs about salvation, and hope for the afterlife can provide meaning when the household feels suddenly incomplete. But faith does not require emotional indifference. Matilda can believe your soul is in God's hands and still desperately wish you were sitting beside her. The two thoughts coexist, and eventually, ordinary life resumes because it has to. Food must be prepared. Animals must be tended. Work continues. Your siblings still need attention. Edmund eventually stops asking when you are coming back, but you are not simply erased. Your parents remember you. And this matters because it destroys one of the easiest stereotypes about medieval parenting. High child mortality did not make children disposable. Matilda and William knew from the beginning that they might lose you. They loved you anyway. And for poorer families especially, that love existed alongside another brutal reality. Sometimes keeping children alive required decisions that could look remarkably harsh from the outside. And for poorer families, love has to coexist with arithmetic. Matilda and William may adore you, but affection does not magically produce another loaf of bread. If the harvest is poor, work disappears, food prices rise, or someone in the household becomes sick, your parents face decisions that wealthier families can often avoid. There are only so many resources, and inconveniently, everyone keeps eating. This means your usefulness can become important surprisingly early. As you grow stronger, you may gather firewood, carry water, watch animals, help with crops, care for younger siblings, or assist with whatever work keeps the household functioning. You announce that you are tired. William points toward the field. Apparently this was not a question about your emotional state. To modern eyes, expecting children to work can look harsh. But Matilda and William may not see a clear separation between childhood and the household economy. Everyone contributes according to ability. Your younger sister performs smaller tasks. You perform larger ones. William performs the heaviest work. Grandmother supervises everyone while somehow performing the least visible labor and maintaining the strongest opinions. The system functions. Usually. Food creates even more difficult choices. During scarcity, Matilda has to stretch what the household possesses. Portions become smaller, ingredients become simpler. Nothing useful is wasted. You complain that yesterday's meal looked suspiciously similar. Matilda informs you that today's meal is completely different. Yesterday it was thin cabbage soup. Today it is cabbage soup that is slightly thinner. Variety has been achieved. But poverty does not automatically mean neglect. Quite the opposite. Matilda may sacrifice her own comfort to protect you. William may work longer hours or seek additional opportunities, because keeping the household secure is part of how he understands fatherhood. Their love is expressed through effort, warm clothing repaired again instead of replaced, food carefully divided, a place found for you in an apprenticeship, a marriage opportunity considered partly because it might provide stability. These decisions can seem calculating until you understand the environment producing them. Matilda and William cannot parent as though money, food, and labor are separate from affection. Survival is affection made practical, and sometimes the loving decision is the one you dislike most, sending you away to work, making you contribute, refusing something the household cannot afford. Your parents are not choosing between love and necessity. They are trying to express love through necessity. But if poverty creates one kind of pressure, wealth does not eliminate parental anxiety. It simply changes the subject. Because when Matilda and William possess land, money, status, or influence, you stop being merely their child. You become something far more dangerous, an investment with a personality. And if Matilda and William happen to possess land, money, status, or influence, your childhood does not suddenly become stress-free. The problems simply become more expensive. You probably eat better, your clothing may be finer, your family might employ servants, and you may receive more education than poorer children. Wonderful. Unfortunately, you are also becoming a strategic asset. If William owns valuable property, your inheritance matters. If your family belongs to the nobility, it matters even more. Land, titles, political relationships, and marriage alliances can all depend partly upon what happens to you. You thought you were a child. William has accidentally turned you into foreign policy. If you are the eldest son, expectations can become enormous. William may need you to inherit successfully, preserve family property, maintain alliances, and eventually produce another generation. He watches you attempt to mount a horse incorrectly. The dynasty suddenly feels fragile. Your education may therefore be carefully managed. Tutors, clergy, experienced household members, or other instructors might prepare you for the responsibilities associated with your position. You learn manners, religion, administration, perhaps languages, perhaps military skills, and, most importantly, how to remain polite during conversations with people you dislike. This may eventually become your most useful aristocratic skill. If you are a daughter, your marriage can become particularly important to family strategy. Matilda and William may consider potential husbands partly according to status, wealth, property, and political connections. You mention that you like Thomas. William mentions that Thomas owns nothing. A brief silence follows. Thomas's beautiful smile has performed poorly during negotiations. But wealth creates psychological pressure for your parents as well. They are not merely trying to keep you alive and respectable. They are trying to preserve something across generations. One disastrous marriage, irresponsible heir, financial mistake, or political conflict can damage what previous generations built. So William becomes intensely interested in your judgment. Unfortunately, he has known you since infancy. This makes trusting your judgment difficult. He remembers when you ate dirt. You explain that you were 3. William considers this insufficiently distant history. Yet eventually, even wealthy parents face the same uncomfortable truth as everyone else. They cannot control you forever. All the tutors, marriage negotiations, discipline, religious instruction, and careful planning eventually produce an adult who can make independent decisions. Sometimes good ones, sometimes terrible ones. And as you finally approach that point, something strange happens. You begin looking back at Matilda and William differently. Their rules start making slightly more sense. Their anxiety becomes more understandable. Even William's endless lectures acquire a certain logic. You are finally beginning to understand your parents. And eventually, something deeply inconvenient happens. Matilda and William begin making sense. Not completely, of course. William still believes every minor household problem can be solved by waking earlier. Matilda still somehow knows you have done something wrong before anyone tells her. Some mysteries survive adulthood. But as you grow older, you begin seeing their behavior differently. When you were 8, William's obsession with work seemed unreasonable. Now you understand that he was trying to make sure you could support yourself. When Matilda constantly asked where you were going, you assumed she enjoyed ruining your afternoon. Now you remember how many children she watched become sick, injured, or simply disappear from the lives their parents had imagined for them. Perhaps the interrogation had context. You also begin noticing how much of their parenting was shaped by fear. Fear that you would die. Fear that you would become irresponsible. Fear that you would damage your reputation. Fear that you would marry badly. Fear that you would remain unmarried. Apparently there was no correct amount of marriage. But underneath those fears was a simple objective. They wanted you to survive without them. That is why William made you work when you wanted to play. Why Matilda taught you household skills you considered boring. Why both cared about your reputation, your religious life, your friendships, and eventually your marriage. They were preparing you for the moment when they could no longer solve your problems. Of course, they made mistakes. William was sometimes too harsh. Matilda sometimes worried unnecessarily. Both occasionally gave you advice based on traditions that probably deserved considerably more investigation. Grandmother remains responsible for several of those, but medieval parents had no access to modern psychology, pediatric medicine, parenting books, or online forums where strangers could confidently inform them that everything they were doing was wrong. They had experience, religion, tradition, family advice, and the terrifying responsibility of keeping you alive. Then something changes your perspective completely. You establish your own household. Perhaps you marry Alice. Matilda pretends she did not know this would happen from the beginning. William eventually admits Alice is sensible. This is practically a declaration of love from him. And then, perhaps you have a child. You hold this tiny person and suddenly understand why Matilda checked your forehead 20 times when you were sick. You understand why William worried about your future before you were old enough to pronounce your own name. You even understand why they became suspicious of Edmund, especially Edmund, because now you are responsible for someone fragile, unpredictable, and apparently determined to endanger themselves whenever your attention disappears. And slowly, horrifyingly, you realize what is happening. You are becoming your parents, and slowly, horrifyingly, you realize what is happening. You are becoming your parents. Perhaps you marry Alice, establish a household, and eventually find yourself staring down at your own newborn child. The baby is tiny, perfect, completely helpless, and apparently determined to make sure nobody in the household sleeps again. Suddenly, Matilda's behavior begins making considerably more sense. You check whether the baby is breathing. Then you check again. Alice tells you the baby is fine. You agree. 30 seconds later, you check again. Somewhere, Matilda would be extremely pleased. Now all those medieval anxieties that surrounded your childhood become yours. You worry about baptism. You worry about illness. You worry about whether the child is warm enough, eating enough, sleeping enough, and eventually behaving properly. Then the child learns to walk. This turns out to be a terrible development. You spent months encouraging those first steps. Now you spend every waking hour preventing those steps from carrying your child toward fires, stairs, animals, tools, water, and every sharp object in medieval Europe. You finally understand why William always looked tired. As the years pass, you begin repeating phrases you once hated. Do as you're told. Put that down. Where have you been? Who were you with? And then comes the darkest moment of all. Your child becomes friends with Edmund's child. You stare at the two of them together. No, absolutely not. You know this bloodline, but this is where the strange psychology of medieval parenting becomes surprisingly familiar. You love your child, yet you worry constantly about what they might become. You want to protect them, but you also know they must become independent. You want them happy, but happiness cannot always come before survival, responsibility, religion, reputation, and the practical demands of your world. So you improvise. Sometimes you repeat what Matilda and William taught you. Sometimes you reject it. Sometimes you hear William's words coming out of your own mouth and experience a brief personal crisis. And eventually your child grows up too. They begin questioning you, then resisting you, then making decisions without asking you. You find this outrageous. Apparently independence was admirable only when you were doing it. And that may be the most enduring thing about medieval parents. Their world is radically different from yours. Their beliefs about childhood, discipline, religion, work, and family can feel distant or even uncomfortable. But underneath them are fears that remain remarkably recognizable. Is my child safe? Am I being too strict? Am I being too soft? Will they make good choices when I am gone? And perhaps most importantly, why are they spending so much time with Edmund?